Okay, we are looking at how to use Microsoft Visio to draw a relational database design. And in the previous tutorial, we ended up showing you how to represent a relation or an entity in the relational database design. So that's where we had ended. So let's continue from there. In this tutorial, I'm going to focus primarily on how to represent a relationship, okay, in the relational database design. So I will quickly set up this entity called department, and then we'll focus on the relationship. So a few aspects of this relationship to remember, about this picture to remember. One is that the relationship is drawn with a dotted line. I hope you remember the distinction between a regular relationship and identifying relationships. So identifying and non-identifying types of relationships. That is, most of your relationships will be dotted lines. These are relationships between regular entities, okay? So that's one aspect of the relationship, whether it's dotted or solid. The other is the cardinalities at the two ends. So let me just blow them up a little bit. So the cardinality near the department entity looks like this. So you have a dotted line and two vertical lines. That means two ones, at least one and at most one. So that means this is a mandatory requirement. Then at the other end, near the employee, the cardinality looks like this. There's one and a crow's foot. So at least one and at most many. So the way I would read this diagram, this relationship between department and employee, is that one department has at least one and at most many employees. That's the cardinality at this end. And if you go in the reverse direction, one employee belongs to at least one and at most one. So exactly one and only one department. That's the relation. That's what we're going to focus on. So let's get back to the Visio chart, the diagram, and let me quickly draw the entity called department. We've already seen how to do that, so I won't spend much time on it. So here's definition. I give the name department, and now I will go to this definition category called columns, and I'll start defining the columns. So the primary key was department name. I'll just shorten it to DEPT name. So DEPT name, we'll keep it as character 10, required primary key, and then go on to the next attribute, which is budget code. So I'll make it budget code, and just to get a different data type, I'll make it an integer. No particular reason why I'm doing that. It's required. The reason I made it required is because you can see in the picture all of these attributes are in boldface. That's your visual indication that it's a required field. So budget code is required. The next one is office number. So I'll just say off num, and again I'll make it an integer. Let's say required, and I believe the last attribute was phone. So here we go, phone, and I'll keep it as character, but just to show you how to change the parameters, I'll make it a character 12. I'll just highlight it, that particular data type, and character 12. Okay, and I also made this required. So here we are. Oh, maybe I didn't check the box properly. Here's phone and required. Very good. So I have the entity or the relation called department, and it matches what we have in this diagram. So the focus now is on this relationship, and I will begin by showing you a very intuitive way of doing it, the way you would do it, as if you were doing in your ER diagram. So I'll bring in the tool called relationship, and then I'll connect the two entities. But before I do that, notice one thing, that in the entity called employee, there are no foreign keys yet. Okay, so you know the rule of conversion is that if you have a one-to-many relationship, the primary key of the one becomes the foreign key of the many. So when I make the connection between department and employee, the foreign key of department, the primary key of department becomes the foreign key of many. So you will see that Visio will do that automatically, okay? And I'm deliberately showing this to you because this is the natural way one would start doing it, and then we will run into an issue. Then we'll back out and do it properly, okay? So here's the one. I connect it to department. And here's the many part of the link, and I connect it to employee. And as soon as I do that, notice that Visio has put in department name the primary key of department as the foreign key of employee. Okay, so it's done me a favor by actually putting in the foreign key. Now let's look at the relationship picture that we have. It's a dotted line. Going back to my PowerPoint, it was a dotted line there as well. So far so good. Now the cardinalities are not quite right. So the cardinalities were 1 1 over here and 1 many over here. Okay, so when I go back to the Visio diagram, you can see that they're not quite right. Okay, so how do I correct them? If I click on this relationship link, you can see that there are many categories of that can be defined on the left hand side. This is where you go: definition, name, miscellaneous, all these tabs that you see, choices that you see under categories. That's where you go to change the cardinalities. Okay, now so let's try and do that. So I go to miscellaneous in the category, and you can see that the default is 0 or more. Okay, so that's the 0 or more default over here. So if I change it to 1 or more, you can see, I'll click over here, you can see the symbols more clearly. You can see that the cardinality next to employee says at least 1, at most many, and that's what we want. Okay, so okay, let me erase this line so you can see it more clearly. Okay, so I'll just circle it here. So you can see that the cardinality at that end, at least 1 and at most many, I have been able to replicate here. Okay, now how do I fix the cardinality at the other end, the cardinality next to department? And what I want is 1 1. So again, let me clean out this place a little bit. If you look at this, cardinality is at least 1 and at most 1. That's what I want, and unfortunately that's where we are going to run into a problem. Okay, so let me go back and click on the relationship, click on miscellaneous once again. That's where we were setting the cardinalities. Now look, we've already used up this left hand side to set the cardinality at one end, so I only have this right hand side to set the cardinalities next to the department, the other end of the relationship. Okay, so right now it says at least 0, at most 1. Okay, the only way I can get it to be 1 1 is by calling it an identifying relationship. So let me click on that. Do you see the cardinality has changed to 1 1? Okay, so by saying it's an identifying relationship, we are saying that an employee cannot exist without a department. So an employee belongs to at least 1 and at most 1 department. So that seems logical enough. So I corrected the cardinality. You can see it matches the cardinality that I had in my original picture. But now notice what has happened is, instead of having a dotted line as the relationship, I now have a solid line. Okay, so it may seem like a trivial thing, but this is a visual picture, a relational database design. So symbols in a picture convey meaning. Okay, so I want it back to a dotted line to show that it's a regular relationship between two entities, not a relationship between a weak and a strong entity. Okay, and that's where I run into a problem, because the only way I can get a dotted line is by saying non-identifying, and as soon as I do that, I can't get the 1 1. Okay, so I don't know why Visio 2016 has been set up that way. The earlier versions were not, but that's what it is. So how do we fix that? The way we fix that is by not allowing by getting around this automatic foreign key. So the fact that Visio automatically inserted the foreign key, we'll try to get around that by inserting a foreign key manually. So let's go back to our picture. You can see that the foreign key is department, right? So this is department. It doesn't have the same name as the primary key of this entity, but that's going to be the source of our linkage. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back as if the relationship didn't exist, and I'm going to manually put in a foreign key into employee and then continue from there. So let's go back here. So just imagine that this relationship didn't exist, that we're about to set up the relationship. So let me delete it. So it was not there, and you can see that I've got this employee entity back, right? Okay, so let me just make a little space for myself here. Okay, so what I'm going to do first is manually insert the foreign key into employee. So here I go. I put in this entity, rather the attribute called department, character 10, and I make it required. Obviously, it's not the primary key, it's a foreign key. And I make it required because you can see in the picture the department was in boldface, meaning it's required. So because this is at least one, at most many, right? So every department must have at least one employee, and every employee must belong to at least one, to exactly one department. So you can't have department being undefined for an employee. An employee must have a department. That's why it's required. Okay, so here's department, and I'm going to move it up. Okay, so oh, sorry, I put it into the wrong entity. So let me correct myself. I put department into this entity. So it's good, at least I'm showing you the different features. People make mistakes when they're building this diagram, and it's good to see how you correct them. So here's department, and let me remove it. Okay, so I put it into the wrong entity. So let me highlight employee, and that's where I want the foreign key called department. So coming back to this picture, I want department in the entity called employee. That's what I'm about to do. So I will go down a little bit, and I put in this attribute called department. Character 10, I'll make it required. Okay, so you can see department has been put in here, but I'll move it up a bit so that it comes next to last name. And in the process, you also see how to juggle the positions of columns. So I just use the move up button and move it up by one, move it up by one. I'm just changing the position of the attribute just for visual purposes. Okay. So, all right, what have I done up to now? Let me again, oh, by the way, you can reduce, you can increase or decrease the size of the window through this. It's just like in Excel and Word. All right, so here's the picture. The only thing I've done here is I've taken the original entity called employee, and I've manually put in the attribute that will become the foreign key, okay, called department. Okay, now I go to my tool called relationship, and I drop it in here. And I do the same connection. So the one end connects to department, the many end connects to employee. And right off the bat, you can see Visio does the same thing once again. It automatically adds department name as a foreign key, thinking that it has done me a favor. It's telling me, oh, you wanted a one-to-many relationship from department to employee. Let me take the primary key of department and make it the foreign key of employee to help you out in your design. Okay, so that's the automatic. I can't get around that automatic insertion at the moment. Okay, but I have already taken care of the problem by manually putting in my foreign key. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to definition of the relationship. Notice that the relationship is highlighted. You got these little blue dots on them, and you can see here. Okay, let me again move it up a little bit so you can see it. So look at the connection. So this diagram tells you that department name in the entity called department is connected to department name in employee. So that's the foreign key that was inserted automatically. Okay. What I'm going to do now is connect the primary key of department, the entity called department, with the foreign key of employee that I had set up manually. So remember, this was the attribute called department, so that I set up manually. So I highlight the primary key and the foreign key, particularly the foreign key that I set up manually. And now I tell Visio to associate the two. And as soon as I do that, do you see that the cardinality next to the department has become 1, 1. Okay, so basically I had to set up the foreign key manually. And what I'm going to clean up the mess that Visio had created through its automatic insertion, I just have to go back to employee and delete this attribute called department name that had been put in automatically. So I highlight employee and I scroll down a little bit, and here's department name, and I remove it. Okay, so I hope you saw what that process was. So I got the mandatory cardinality 1, 1 here. I have to go back and correct the cardinality next to the employee, but that's pretty easy. You have seen that before. So I click on miscellaneous, and here for the cardinality, which is for the many end, I say 1 or more. As soon as I say 1 or more, then I have the cardinality that I want. So let's take a look at the picture that I have created thus far. I spend most of the time focusing on how to set up the one-to-many relationship, identifying versus non-identifying, and how you set up the foreign key manually to get the cardinalities just right. Okay, now so it matches the picture, rather it matches the picture that I have now for the PowerPoint slide. You can see the dotted line for the relationship and the cardinalities at the two ends. And I'm going to end this video by showing you one other feature of this software that's there. Now, if you notice in the picture, the relational database design, there are no names given to any of these relationships. Now, it's a good habit to give some names to the relationships so that you can extract more meaning out of the picture. But by default, you can see in this diagram, there are no names. Okay, so how do I go about, if I click on the relationship here and I highlight it, when we go to name, if I among the different categories on the left hand side, if I highlight name, do you see that there are two phrases here? It says verb phrase, inverse phrase. What that means is these are the names you want to use for the relationship in both directions. Okay, so has, for example, would be one department has many employees, and this inverse phrase is what you would use in going in the reverse direction. So let me change the name. So instead of has, I will say hires, and just to give it a different name. So I'll say one department hires many employees, and if I go in the reverse direction, I'll say one employee is hired by. It's kind of a longish name. It's good to have short name. So if I put those two names, but do you see that they don't show up in the picture here at all? Okay, so even though I type them in the specification, they're not showing up, and the reason they're not showing up is because of the display options. So if I go to display options, you see these three tabs which say general, table, and relationship. Under the relationship tab, you can see that this show the verb phrase option is not checked off. So if I click this and I say I want both the forward and the reverse inverse text, if I say okay, then you can see those names show up in the dotted line. Now, if your relational database design diagram has a lot of lines, then putting names on them, sometimes you don't have space to put the names and you can take them out. But I just wanted to show you that that option is there. Whenever possible, it's good to give names to the relationship so that when you read them out verbally, you can extract more meaning from them. So let me take out the display option here. So don't display name. I'm just showing you how to do that. And so we'll stop this particular video from now, and we'll continue. We'll pick up from here in the next tutorial.